I am Raymond. I will start by telling a bit about myself. I am a racer. I have been fond of cars and bikes since I was 5. All the toys I ever bought were such vehicles. I learned about a bicycle when I was 4 years old. I loved racing with other kids on the street and always won. Growing up, I learned to drive a bike when I was 11. I was underage, but my dad greatly supported my passion. He believed it would get me somewhere someday, so he was more than willing to teach it. Within the next 2 years, I was smoothly driving better than many adults who had been doing it for years. Next, I learned how to drive a car and was really good at it by the time I turned 14. Unsurprisingly, my favorite movie was the Fast and Furious series, and my favorite video game was the Need for Speed. I have always been the sort of person who is not okay with losing. I admit that I am a sore loser, indeed. If I ever lost a race, I began to work on winning the next one from the winner to satisfy myself. Perhaps that was why I did not sit in peace when my wife cheated on me. Only taking revenge gave me the satisfaction I really needed. I began to race professionally from the day I turned 18. I had been waiting for it all my life. I had a good start as I was naturally gifted with this talent. The only hitch I went through was by accident. I got into an accident when I was 20. It was a practice run, and the brakes failed. My car was annihilated, and I also suffered severe injuries. I had to go through 2 surgeries. It took me about a year to completely recover. When I had finally gotten better, my parents became paranoid. They asked me several times not to pursue racing, but I would not listen to them, obviously. I was a little scared too, but it was not the fear of getting into an accident again. It was the fear of being out of practice and never being out of practice and never being that good again. When I started practicing again, I never realized I had the trauma of the accident impregnated me as well. I began to have anxiety issues. It was not serious, so I just ignored it and pretended it was not there. But gradually, it worsened with time instead of getting better. Finally, when I had a panic attack for the first time, it scared me. My parents were more scared and worried than me. I had to consult a psychiatrist. He prescribed some medicines for overcoming the physical symptoms. He also referred me to a consultant for therapy sessions. Initially, I was reluctant to take those sessions, but my parents forced me to do so, and I was so glad that they did. With the help of the therapy, I was able to overcome my anxiety much more quickly. It helped me deal with the issues in a much better way. After getting physically and mentally healed, I returned to my passion and profession again with new hope, courage, and energy. I was not doing well in the beginning, of course. It took time, but I finally returned to being one of the best in the game. I met my wife at one of the races. She was there with her friends as a spectator. I was nervous about that particular race because I would race for the first time after my accident. I was scared of losing, as usual. However, it went great and I won. I received the prize money and the medal. I was having my pictures taken when a girl came up to me. She was shy and hesitant, but she wanted an autograph from me. I looked into her eyes, and I got drawn towards her instantly. I gave her the signature and asked if I could have her number. She blushed and wrote it down in her notebook. She tore the page and gave it to me. I smiled at her. She looked down and walked away. That night, my friends and I went to the club to celebrate. As I got home, I was totally drunk. I went straight to bed, but I had that shy girl from the race in my head. I looked in my pocket and took out that paper. I saved her number. I realized I did not know her name, so I kept it the name of Shy Girl. I texted her, saying I wanted to ask her name and would be honored to take her out on a date. I took her to a restaurant and, afterwards, on a drive in my car. She said she was scared of sitting in high-speed vehicles. I asked what she was doing in a car race then. She told me she enjoyed watching races and had a thing for races. Given her fear, I did not drive the car at high speed. We got married 6 months later and things went from being perfect to being the worst. I often had to go out of the city for races and competitions. Alice used to accompany me in all of them. She loved to watch me race and was the happiest after I won. After a year, however, Alice began to avoid going with me on these races. She made new excuses each time she was tired or had work to do. I did not feel good about it, as I had gotten used to having her by my side. When she began doing it too often, I found it strange and knew there was some reason behind it. I started to get a little worried, as Alice did not seem normal. I decided to ask her what was up with her. Something did not feel right. The next time I returned from a race, I asked her gently if something was bothering her. She said it was nothing, but I was not satisfied by her denial, so I kept asking until she gave me a reasonable answer. After much insistence, Alice said that it was because her fear of speed had gotten extreme, and she found it hard to accompany me to the races. It was just a story that Alice made to get me to stop insisting. But at that time, I believed her and felt so bad. Not coming to the races for me was sad for me, but it was more upsetting that her fear had gotten worse with me when I had expected it to get better with time. I asked her if she wanted to undergo some therapy if things were terrible for her, but she refused. I tried to convince her, but she stayed firm on it. I let it go. I could not force her, obviously. I went to the United Kingdom for an international competition a few days later. I expected Alice to come along with me, but to my surprise, she refused. I was really shocked by that conversation. I actually got into a heated argument with Alice over it. I told her that she was being irrational. She got offended by my comment and called me an insensitive man. I had never shown support even once. I wanted her to escape her fear, but she did not like it. Later that day, I came to her and apologized, saying she did not have to go to the races. We would hang out and have fun in London. But she was extremely cold towards me. She said she needed some time alone and wanted some space from me. I was dismayed. I could not believe she was pushing me away like this. I argued no more and prepared as I had to leave the following week. I went to London, and the goodbye hug was the most emotionless hug I had ever gotten from my wife. I left for London with a sad heart. However, I became too busy once I got there and forgot all about it. Thankfully, I stood second in the final competition, which was huge. I celebrated a lot and could not wait to get home to share my happiness with my wife. I was on the plane returning home when I got a message from my best friend. We were together in most races, but he had not participated in this competition. That message made my heart stop beating for a second. It was a picture of Alice sitting in a car with another guy I knew, as he was a racer too. He had his hands all over in that picture. I texted my friend asking him what the hell that was, and he told me this picture was circulating all over the group. He said he was really sorry. That flight home was the most challenging thing of my life. I felt like having panic attacks that I had overcome with so much effort. I somehow reached home, and Alice was not home. I was more than relieved. I needed some time to compose myself. I cried a lot. Once my mental breakdown was over, I took a shower. Whilst showering, I devised the perfect plan to get the truth out my cheating wife's mouth. An hour later, Alice got home. She was acting all nice and excited. She just jumped on me, congratulating me, and kissing me all over. I went along with her facade. I did not want her to suspect that I knew everything. At dinner, she made my favorite steak. We had a very romantic evening. After dinner, I asked her if she wanted to come with me on a small romantic drive to celebrate my win. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. We got into the car, and I took it straight to the highway. I began to speed up. Alice instantly buckled her seatbelt. She asked me to slow down, and I said I will. Then I asked her if there was something she wanted to tell me about. She was clueless, as she denied it. I sped the car more. Alice began to panic. She began to beg me to slow the vehicle down. That was when I brought up the picture I had seen of her with a guy. She looked horrified. Her hands began to shake. My rage was getting out of control, and so was the speed. I did not care if both of us got killed. I was going to get it out of her and humiliate her. Alice was having difficulty breathing, but within a few seconds, she started crying and screaming that she had been cheating on me for months. She kept shouting. I stopped the car and looked at her in disbelief. She wanted to explain, but I called and asked her to shut up. Both of us were completely silent on the ride back home. I tried to leave Alice stranded on the highway, but that was not me. The following day, the first thing I did was visit my lawyer's office. I told him about the situation and wanted a divorce, as there was no way on earth that I could forgive Alice for cheating on me. Alice left the house that day, and I have no idea where she went as I cut contact with her. This heartbreak was a lot for me to take in. I threw myself entirely into the races to keep my mind off it. It did not work, as I got the news of Alice getting married to that guy within the next 4 months. It devastated me that she had just moved on this quickly and went and married him. I was super furious at them, but I could not get it all out of myself. I began to have mental health issues once again. I indulged myself in very unhealthy habits. I was unable to cope with this betrayal and loss. I drank a lot and even began to smoke cigarettes, which I always disapproved of and never thought I would even try. My parents began to get really worried about me. One day, my dad came over to talk to me. He said I was ruining myself like this. I could do better. I started crying like a baby in front of my dad. He advised me to go back to therapy. I disagreed at first, but eventually agreed because I knew I had to get better, and doing it all alone was not really helping at all. I went to my therapist and began to take my sessions regularly. I knew I had to excel at what I do. I could not let my career drain just because my wife cheated on me. I would show that I could do much better and was the best at what I did. I wanted to show my ex-wife that the guy she cheated on me with was nothing compared to me. Fate brought me a chance 2 months later. State championship had begun, and I was told by my friend that her new husband was going to participate in it. I knew he was a good racer, but I had to win this race to boost myself, confidence, and feel good about myself. That divorce really made me feel like shit. I began to work even harder on my skills. On the day of the race, I was really confident. I just had a feeling that I was going to stand first. Alice did show up at the race. I hated how she was there to support him, but I wanted to see her shudder as he lost. The race began, and I did win it. I received the trophy and medal when my eyes fell on Alice. She looked sad, which made me smile. I waved sarcastically towards her, and she looked away. I knew that face meant she was feeling upset. Her husband came to shake my hand as I was the winner. I had this gleam in my eyes when I looked at him. He had this gloom at the race he had just lost to me. Seeing them so worked up on this loss gave me more satisfaction than expected. It was a kind of revenge that I didn't know I really needed. Stop, this is how my marriage fell apart. My wife, 30 female, was a teacher, and we just started trying to conceive. She always wanted children, since she was young, but she was extremely careful and responsible by waiting until 4 years into marriage to try. I, 29 male, was ready to be a parent. I grew up without my father, only an abusive stepdad, so it became a dream of mine to coach, mentor, and love a child of my own. Knowing we could become pregnant, we started working hard. One evening, I was on the way home from a second part-time job that I hated when I stopped to get gas. My wife had left earlier that day to stay with her sister for a few days to comfort her over the passing of her old dog. When my bank card, joint with my wife's name, was declined, I checked the balance on my phone. There was a hold on the account from the Chattanooga Hotel. That city in Tennessee was 75 miles from our home in Georgia. With that $200 hold, our available account balance was $0. Months prior, my wife maxed out our credit card to buy into some business proposition that she swore was going to make us money. Now stranded and furious without a way to get gas, I called my wife. She didn't answer right away, and when she did on the fourth call, she sounded irritated. I asked her why there was a hold on the account for a hotel, and she stuttered, completely caught. She formulated a sentence that said her sister needed a getaway sometime away from home to grieve in luxury. I said I knew that was nonsense because she wouldn't take her sister 75 miles away to do that. She freaked out and started breathing and praying quietly. She then asked me to forgive her, but before I could respond, I heard another man's voice say, "What are you doing? Hang up." Then the call ended. I was beside myself with worry and betrayal. I called her family and told them what was going on. Her sister was extremely upset too, even more upset because she used her as a cover-up lie. Her dog hadn't even passed away yet. She stayed on the phone with me, just assuring me about the future and that I could get through this with or without my wife. It was up to me. I have the strength to face this. When my wife returned hours later, I wanted her to explain herself. I had to know why she did this and how she even knew AP. She was extremely apologetic, saying she met him online and this was the first time they met in person. She said they went to the movies, where AP lost his wallet. They went back for it, but they were closed. AP drove 7 hours to Chattanooga, so he needed her to reserve the hotel for them, until he could pay for it with his wallet the next day. That's why the hold unexpectedly gave away her entire plan. She said she was glad I caught her because it was like a slap back to reality that stopped her from having sex with him. She was just trying to make it easier for me to forgive her and feel like nothing should stop us from continuing our marriage. I told her I couldn't believe a word that came out of her mouth and I would never trust her again. This went beyond sleeping with a stranger in a hotel. This was meaning, planning, talking, flirting, committing, scheming, and most importantly, still cheating on me. She took steps to make it happen to the point where it would be safer for me to assume she cheated. So I sent her away. She was completely shocked, like she really thought she could talk her way to forgiveness. She started crying, but I told her to stop because it would only waste precious time. I knew she wasn't the woman I should have children with. When I told her this, she dropped everything. She tried to reach for my hands, but I pulled away. I asked her why I would have children with a woman that lied to me and drove miles away to meet another man in a hotel room. She said since nothing actually happened and she was remorseful, I should stay married to her and continue to trust her. That didn't make sense at all from a betrayed perspective. She went to her sister's for real this time to live with her. Her sister was not happy, so their arrangement only lasted until she kicked her out a few months after our divorce was final. I was able to prove in the courts what kind of woman my wife really was. The real whammy in all of this that proves she would have continued her sneaky behavior is our phone records. I obtained them to show the court she was communicating with AP for a year and a half before they met in person. He wasn't the only person she communicated with, and she was actually getting paid by men online to send them nudes. OP, it is still considered cheating, even if she didn't sleep with anyone, although I believe she did. She was talking to AP for so long before you even found out that the chances of her showing any restraint or remorse is slim. This man was in a relationship with her and would have continued speaking to her, even if you didn't know about it. It's a much better option for your sanity in future to cut ties with a person that does this. There's no respect, consideration, or love in her actions. You deserve better than this, and I'm glad you did the right thing by leaving her. When we catch a spouse after having no idea there is something going on, it can be hard to lay down the law and do what's right for yourself. Don't live in denial and try to trust an untrustworthy person. Just part ways, separate your lives again, and find someone new after you do some personal healing and discovery. Thank you for sharing with us. Let's now get into our second story for today. My wife, 33 female, and I, 40 male, were married for 9 years before she cheated on me. She was really into flea marketing and collecting knickknacks. We lived with my brother in his house, but she had an RV camper and a garden in the front yard that she decorated and cared for. Whenever we went on camping trips, we brought our dog, but my wife really wanted to own cows. They were her favorite animal, and she was a farmer's daughter. While at a flea market one day, she met a man that owned several cow calves. As it turned out, this man was at the flea market weekly, just like her. They started setting up their tables side by side, and I was happy for her. She made a friend who shared her interests and made her laugh. I didn't find it odd or worry about her cheating on me with this man. She took a selfie with him, Mike, and posted it on Instagram, calling him a fellow junkie as a joke. He looked to be at least 10 years older than me. My wife and I met in college, where I had to fight off other guys, and our bond only became stronger in marriage. Her sister was cheated on by her husband, and whenever that happened, my wife talked about what a shame it is whenever someone cheats. She told me she was so thankful to have me as her husband, and that she would never break my heart like that. They were together every Saturday morning, so they started having breakfast together and sharing more personal details. We had him over for dinner, and he was a pretty likable guy. He actually came to a cookout that was technically a family reunion, so our whole family got to meet him. He started sharing tips and experiences with her father about his cows. Within a year, they became good friends. One summer, Mike invited my wife and me to camp on his mountain land. He was growing acres of oak trees to sell as his main source of income, so it was a great place to experience the outdoors. My wife insisted we go, so we took the RV camper and planned to stay for a week. I was a little nervous, but she convinced me it would turn out fine. She only wanted to take up his offer because he was lonely and needed friends. For 3 days, we had a great time meeting his cows, taking pictures, having cookouts, going fishing, and having campfires. In the middle of the fourth night, around 1 a.m., I sat straight up in bed when I couldn't feel my wife next to me. Since she wasn't in the camper, I went outside and called for her. I didn't hear anything, so I started walking toward Mike's cabin. On the way, the outdoor showers were within eyesight, and I caught a glimpse of a small light in what looked like the shape of bodies. I approached as quietly as I could until I could see what was happening. Mike was holding my wife against him in the shower, kissing her. Needless to say, they were both in their birthday suits. Just before I confronted them, I heard AP tell her he wanted to do it again. She excitedly agreed before I walked up to them and yelled, making them both jump and grab their towels. I asked what exactly they were going to do again. They stood there shamefully, swearing a little. It only took my wife a few seconds to start crying. I could tell she just didn't expect me to catch her, and she wished she could go back in time. AP stepped forward to apologize. He was an army vet, so I looked up to him, and it was harder for me to feel real anger towards him. He said he interfered in our relationship and he'd never forgive himself, but he suggested that I forgive my wife because it was him who asked her to do what I asked. He couldn't look me in the eye, so I knew what happened. When I realized the truth, my wife cried harder, called my name, and begged me to forgive her. It was so dramatic, and I hate drama. I remember feeling very numb before I found it possible to turn around, go back to the camper, and get my phone. I called my brother and told him everything. He couldn't believe my wife did this to me. He drove through the middle of the night on a country road to come pick me up and take me home. It was an hour-and-a-half drive, so while I waited, my wife awkwardly begged me to forgive her and called back my brother to tell him I didn't need a ride. She tried offering any kind of deal to get me to forgive her, failing to notice that there wasn't a proper way to recover from infidelity. Once that decision is made, it can't be undone. My wife came to the house to get her stuff gradually over time. Every time she came by, I had my brother talk to her if necessary because I couldn't stand her. It might have been AP's idea for them to do things, but she made the choice to leave the camper and get naked for him. This was still her fault because she clearly didn't respect or care about me as her husband. She had the nerve to say it shouldn't even count because it happened so fast and she was half asleep. That was one of the last things I ever heard her say. She continued living on AP's property 2 years after our divorce. Then AP decided to sell the majority of his acreage and force my ex to leave. She tried to ask her father permission to park her RV at his house, but he refused. He was extremely disappointed in her and AP and didn't want to have anything to do with them. They betrayed everything he believed in when it came to trust, family, and relationships. Since she didn't have anywhere else to park her RV, she now lives in a campground alone. What happened here was most definitely her fault just as much as it was AP's. We don't really know who encouraged this affair to happen, but we can safely assume they both played a part because it wasn't forced. They were caught, so AP tried taking the blame, but that doesn't give him the right to pardon your wife's poor decision-making. If your wife truly wanted you to remain her husband, she never would have allowed herself to cheat on you. It doesn't sound like there was any problem in your marriage and nothing your wife would have wanted you to work on. She just gave in to her primal urges to mate with a man that impressed her or bonded with her. A relationship never has to become sexual. She would have remained an honorable wife and maintained all her relationships as they were, but instead she took that step that the marriage couldn't recover from. What a terrible display of loyalty on her part. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.